All right, Nick, let's talk about the Detroit Lions. I think while everyone is talking about big free agency moves, splashy stuff, the Lions have kind of gone under the radar with some of the signings they've got. But specifically, there's a few things they did to one contract in particular that I think is very under the radar, very deep cut, and it may take you a couple times to understand what's going on here, but this just shows the next level thinking that the Detroit Lions have when it regards to all things in the front office. Let's get into the article, and I think you can probably wrap your head around this more on the other side. I'll probably get you to explain this one, Nick. But this is from Pride of Detroit. It says the Vikings utilized 4 voided years in Marcus Davenport's contract last year, which pushed most of his $8.5 million signing bonus into the future. That all accelerates this year into a total of $6.8 million in dead cap for the 2024 season. Meanwhile, the Lions signed Davenport to a much more reasonable one-year, $6.5 million deal with only $3 million guaranteed. And get this, Detroit utilized an uncommon salary cap rule to make his overall cap hit just $3.42 million this year. The details are a bit complicated, but I'll give you the basics. It's called the 50% rule, and it allows the team to use a portion of the base salary and other bonus and treat them as a prorated signing bonus. Detroit used this stipulation in Vitae's restructured contract last year. If you want to learn more about it, because the Lions added a void year to Davenport's contract, those signing bonuses, cap hits, are split between this year and next year. There's a lot involved with this, Nick. I'm sure you're going to explain it to us and kind of just show us how genius this is for the Lions. But Lions fans, in the comment section below, I think there's been a lot of contracts throughout history that have been very good. This one, it seems to be just a regular contract on the surface, but I think this was one of the smarter laid out contracts in Lions history. Let us know. This is kind of a deep cut, but what kind of deals have you seen at first that maybe seem pretty mundane that Lions sign guys to, but afterwards you realize how team friendly or how good they were for the Lions? Let us know some of the favorite contract signings you've seen in Lions history in the comment section below. But Nick, what are your thoughts on this latest contract by the Lions?
Yeah, so I think this is an example of, I think, the Lions being revolutionary, and I'm not being hyperbolic in describing how they approach and solve problems. This 50% rule is virtually unheard of, except for the Detroit Lions in this instance, and of course, last offseason as well. I spent a lot of time researching. I have not found another team in the past decade or so. I couldn't go back any farther. There's less, reported salary cap information the farther you go back, obviously, that is even reportedly considered using this rule. And basically, what this allows you to do is based on the contract and cap hit one year versus the following year, if that cap hit is less than or greater than 50%, it gives you some wiggle room to move dollars around to create cap space for the short term or potentially move out cap space in terms of signing bonuses for void years on the back end. It's a lot of legalese, it's a lot of capology, but basically what it shows is that the Lions are taking advantage of every little rule, every little footnote that exists in the collective bargaining agreement and using it to their advantage. And I think that's the key takeaway here. Any advantage you can get in the salary cap world where parity is everything, getting a few $1,000,000 of cap space, right? That can go a long way. That can be the difference between signing some of the big guys they've got, like DJ Reader, and maybe having DJ Reader go somewhere else, right? That couple $1,000,000, it can make a huge difference. It can be the difference between getting Amon-Ra St. Brown happy on a potential extension, or maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown's angry about the Lions and suddenly his entire demeanor changes because he got left out a few $1,000,000, right? Every little bit matters in a salary cap world. And the Lions and Brad Holmes are going at it just completely different than the way anyone I've ever seen approach it. Right, we're coming off the era of Bill Belichick and his genius strategies. We all know about the Chiefs and how smart they are, but the fact that the Lions are willing to just go like deep into the rule book here of the CBA and the cap rules and restrictions and things like that to find this rule and this 50% rule and then use it to your advantage. Because here's the important thing. You don't use this rule to your advantage unless you set up the contracts when you negotiated with the player's agent at the very beginning with this in mind, right? Because it depends on that 50% cutoff. So you sign players, you negotiate with players with the thought in mind to potentially use this to your advantage in the future. So this isn't just something where just one day the Lions are like, heck, look at this. We can save some cap space this year. This was a lucky break. No, this has been decided and thought about for months for each of these players. And I think going back years, especially when you go back to what they did last offseason. And it's these little moves, this willing to do the extra work, the research, to think differently, that I think has the chance to push the Lions over the top. Obviously, they're a talented team. They got a lot of great coaches. But to me, what really elevates teams from good to great is the ability to just think and solve problems differently than every other team in the NFL. The Chiefs do it with creative offense. The Patriots did it for years with everything Belichick did, all their trick plays, unique formations, game management situations, things like that, the whole do your job concept. And the Lions are going about it in a very similar direction. They're not doing the exact same thing the Chiefs are doing or what the Patriots were doing, but they are thinking differently. They're thinking creatively. And this revolutionary strategy by Holmes and the Lions, I think, puts them in a position to leapfrog the 49ers potentially and become the number one team in the NFC.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that when you hear, okay, 50% rule, and you kind of hear about it, you want to crack open the NFL rulebook and try to find it. And I've done just that, but it's so difficult to find. I could not even find it after, a little bit of Google food trying to figure it out. This is how deep of a cut it is for the Lions. This is something that you can't just like, you have to know about this. And like you said, this isn't something that you can just say, oh, why don't we just pull out this 50% rule? You can't just whip it out and use it. Like you said, this is something that has to be planned in advance, especially in signing a guy like Davenport. A lot of things come into play to doing something like this. So I think, like you said, this just shows the level of scrutiny. Everyone talks about Dan Campbell. They talk about the culture and, building a culture. It takes a long time. It's something you got to set up, get the right guys in place, get the right coaches in place. It's a long process to build a new culture if you want it to last in your franchise. And that's all well and good. But no one's talking about, I feel like, what Brad Holmes is doing in this front office as far as he is digging, he is making a new front office culture of we've got to be the smartest, we've got to be the savviest. We have to do the fringe things that people don't think about. That is what's going to set us apart. Because when they got to this Lions team, just like everyone said with Dan Campbell, this was a bad team when they got here. Dan Campbell went out, he had to change a lot of things. But that goes for the front office too. You have to dig deep and be able to find the little things that put you over the head to turn a team that was in the shape the Detroit Lions were to a team that they are now, potentially just so close to being in the Super Bowl, NFC title game contenders. This is a Detroit Lions team that I think these little moves, these are things that put them over the edge, and that is why I would say they're easily NFC champion Super Bowl contenders for next year.
It's important to remember because we forget sometimes that there are levels to management and leadership of an NFL franchise, right? There are obviously good GMs and bad GMs, but there is definitely a gap between the good and the great and the good and the special, right? And that's what Holmes is proving, and that's what he's shown. I'm reminded of the story about after Hurricane Harvey hit Houston years and years and years ago. A lot of people in the investment community were trying to bet dollars on oil and which refineries were working and things like that, trying to make a quick buck. And then after the fact, there was one hedge fund that literally hired people in rowboats, literally right after the storm, to go out and look at the oil rigs and test the oil rigs to see which rigs were working, and then call up that hedge fund and say, we're betting on these rigs and these companies, right? That's a whole nother level of operation. That's a whole nother level of commitment. That's a whole another level of thinking. Nobody else is thinking that, right? Everyone's like, maybe this company's oil rigs, maybe that company's oil rigs. One hedge fund's like, no, we're going to go out to the oil rigs and inspect it. We're going to take that extra step. We're going to think differently. When I heard about this with the Lions and Brad Holmes, that's what it reminded me of. It's just another level. It's taking things to a deeper approach. Like this 50% rule, it was unheard of. I've been following and researching the cap for a very long time. I had never even heard of this rule, but the Lions literally use it as a key part of their strategy. There's levels to executing the general manager position. Frankly, there's levels to everything, but the ability of Brad Holmes to be an elite level, unprecedented, I'll say at this point, leader, I think gives the Lions that extra boost they need. This is one of those things that, again, it doesn't make all the headlines, but when you make revolutionary moves like this, your team will always have a chance to be successful.